Greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Katie Farine, and she is going to be taking us through Designer and demystify a little bit and show us some workflows. But before we get into that, just a few items of housekeeping. First of all, as you may be aware, we are not broadcasting from our usual controlled environment. Both Katie and I, as well as all of our colleagues, are working from home, so we are broadcasting from our homes. So if there are any audio or connectivity issues, we just ask that you bear with us and be patient, and we'll try and get through those as best as we can. But we aren't in our usual controlled environments, so we don't have the same sort of connection and audio that we normally have. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the question pane. If you don't see the question pane and you're on the web app, just look for the circle with the question mark in it and click on that icon to get to the questions. Or if you're using the actual app, look for a dark gray toolbar with an orange box with a white arrow on it. Click on that orange box, and that will maximize the question pane. Ask any questions you have, but please know that we will hold on those until the end of the session. And last of all, just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded. We do record all of our webinars, and it will take us a couple of days to get it edited, but once it's edited and ready for on-demand viewing, it will be viewable at shure.com/webinars. Once again, that is shure.com/webinars. This will be there, like I said, in a couple of days. All of our past archived webinars are there as well. We have a lot of great webinars across a lot of audio topics, so please feel free to go there and peruse all of our past webinars. Once again, that is shure.com/webinars. All right, so that wraps up all the housekeeping. Now let's dive in. And to start the process today, we're actually going to give you guys a couple of polls to kind of get a level set of where everyone is with Designer and their familiarity with it. So I'm going to launch the first question here. So the first question you're seeing on your screen is, have you ever used Shure's Designer software before? So please type in yes or click yes or no on that poll. It looks like we're getting our responses in. We'll let this run for a few minutes and see how many responses we get. So far it's about 50-50, but we only have about 10% voting. So we'll give it a few more minutes and get some more votes in. Whether you've used Designer or not before, today will hopefully be illuminating and teach you a little bit more about the great workflows and processes you can use for it. All right, so we're up above around 75%, and I'm going to close the poll. And we have a total of 52% that have said yes, that they've used Designer before, and 48% that said no, so about half and half there. But I think this is going to be illuminating for everyone. And then the next one is for those of you that voted yes. If you do use Designer, do you use it on a recurring basis? So take a few moments here to get those votes in. So far, we're about half and half, although it's starting to skew a little bit more. So get those votes in. If you are a Designer user, do you use it on a recurring basis? Or have you only maybe used it once or twice? Just a few more votes coming in. We'll let it go for just a few more moments. Just a few more moments on this poll about if you use Designer regularly. And we're almost up to about 50% voted, which would make sense because about 50% of you have used it before. So at 50% voting, we would say about 52% of those half of you that use Designer use it on a regular basis and the other half don't. All righty. And then for our last question, just sort of just to kind of understand who we've got here, we want to know a little bit about your role. So what best describes your role? Are you an integrator and specializing in design engineering? Are you an integrator that specializes in field engineering? Are you an AV IT manager? Or are you something else? So let us know who you are, and that will make sure that we're giving you the information that you need. So just a few more minutes here to let a few more votes come in. Just a few more moments to let this poll about who you are and what you do to come in. All right, so we're a little over 50% now with this one. I'll just get a little more. We're almost to 75%. All right. So at 75%, we've got about 34% of design engineer integrators, 13% of field engineer integrators, 7% AV IT managers, and 45% others. So that's who we're talking to today. And as I said, I think we're going to give you a lot of great information and show you kind of all of the great secrets and tools that Designer can unlock for you. So with that said, and with those polls taken, thank you so much for participating. Let's get into the good stuff. So Katie's going to hop into the Designer software itself, and we're actually going to kind of take you on a hands-on demo through it. So Katie, take it away.
All right, thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Farine. I'm a product specialist at Shure, so I'm within our product management team, and I work on Designer as well as some of our other network system software, such as our system on monitoring software as well. So as Cheryl mentioned, we're really going to be focusing on a software demo today. I don't really have slides outside of this title one, so I'm going to exit out of it and jump right into Designer. So for this specific demo today, I'm using Designer 4.1. This is the latest production version that released a couple months ago at that trade show, alongside with our IntelliMix Room, which is our software-based DSP product that also released at the same time. And I'm going to basically start out with a high-level tour of Designer and kind of the architecture of the application and how you can navigate around. And then I'm going to get into a couple specific use cases. The first being, if you're familiar with the latest firmware update of the P300 or the ANIUSB matrix devices, the web interfaces for those devices pared down a lot and kind of defers to Designer for full configuration alongside our networked microphones. So I'm going to show basically if you're used to those web interfaces, the best ways to kind of get into the device that's online the fastest. And then after that, I'll go into some other workflows in Designer, like working with virtual devices when you're off the network and some of those other features that we have. Okay, so starting with a high-level tour of Designer, this is what you see when you open Designer 4.1. The default tab is this My Projects page. This is simply a way to organize your rooms. So Designer has this kind of architecture where you have a project. So this could be a building or a campus or really whatever you want it to be, though we've typically seen this as typically different buildings or different end users if you're an integrator or consultant. So I'm just going to call this Shure building. And the architecture is that under a project, you can create multiple locations within Designer. These can be rooms or floors, again, whatever you want them to be, though we typically see users creating different rooms. So when I create a location here, for example, this will pop open a new window that is basically where we'll be spending a lot of the time in the demos. This is where you can kind of design your whole audio system as well as work with online devices. So we'll get into that more later, but I just want to finish the high-level tour of this main navigation on the home page. So after projects is my templates. This is very similar to what a Designer location is, but basically a way for you to organize your cookie cutter type rooms. If you have a few room types, for example, that you want to reuse over and over, you can create a location template from here. And again, once this loads, this is going to look very similar to what we just looked at for a location, but it's purely around virtual devices, which is a way to basically design everything when you're off the network. And then you can basically create locations as copies from this template, and this template can be the single source of truth that you reuse over and over. Again, we'll get more into the specifics of that workflow in a bit. The next tab is online devices. This is very similar to our web device discovery app, if you're familiar with it. This is going to basically discover devices that are on the same subnet as your Designer machine. And you can actually also add cross-subnet devices from here and completely control those devices that are on different subnets as well. Next is event log. This is a system event log specifically for Designer. So we do have device event logs. So if you want to dig into device specifics, you can get to device event logs from Designer as well. This is more so a system event log of things that you've done in Designer, like imported and exported projects, or some of these workflows in Designer, like audio routing and pushing from virtual devices to online devices and things like that. And you can export this log up here if you want to send that to support for any troubleshooting. Lastly, on the left is settings. I think most importantly here is the NIC selection. So this is where you select which NIC will be used to discover the devices. If you go to online devices and you see nothing here, the empty state of this page will basically point you to the network settings to make sure that you have the right NIC selected. Okay, so getting into specific use cases now that that's kind of the high-level tour of the app architecture. We'll start with the use case I mentioned for people who are specifically used to the web interface, the P300 and ANIUSB, for example. If you want to quickly get to your online devices, I would say that going to this online devices list and then clicking a device and clicking configure is the most parallel path that we have in Designer to the web device discovery app and the web interface of our devices. So once I open this MXA 310, for example, this is the table array microphone I have in front of me, I can see the coverage settings for this device. I see my channel settings as well. And most everything that's in the web UIs is available when you double click or again, click that configure button in the toolbar in Designer. So there are a few exceptions of workflows that were previously in the web UIs that we kind of moved up to the system level at the location in Designer. So I'll show those in a bit as well. But a good workflow to keep in mind, whenever you see a online device in Designer or a virtual device, which we'll get into, if you double click it, then you're going to basically get what's in the web UIs for these products. So again, I double clicked the P300. And now I can see the schematic view. And again, for those of you who are familiar with the web interfaces for the P300, this is doing most all of that, except for, again, a few workflows that moved up to the location level in Designer. Okay, so I would say that's the most parallel path to quickly getting to working with your online devices that are on the network. We should look at some of the workflows for within a location in Designer to look at some of those things I mentioned that are a bit different. So I'm going to open up my Shure building project and now my room 101. You will notice there's a lot of windows that kind of pop up in this version of Designer. We heard feedback and are going to improve this in the next upcoming release. It's coming very soon, so just a heads up. Okay, so I've opened my room 101. One quirk about Designer 4.1 is that it will kind of launch automatically with virtual devices. So what we're going to have in the next release is if you're seeing online devices on your network, we'll go straight into this live mode here. Because a Designer location can either be working with virtual devices when you're off the network, or can be working in live mode in real time with these online devices. For now, I'm going to go in live mode and show you some of the things that I was talking about for different workflows from the web UIs. So what I've just done is I dragged in my devices from the left. You can also identify them from this left panel as well. If you have a lot of devices, you simply hover over the device and it's physically, blinking the LED on the 310 right now. And let's take a look at the architecture kind of this location. So there's these three main tabs at the top: Overview, Coverage Map, and Signal Flow. Overview is basically a device list of what you've got in your location, but also has a few other features like toggling between, again, working with virtual devices versus live mode, creating a template, some security settings, which we'll get into. And then again, you can always double click a device from this view to get into the kind of single device controls for that specific device. The next page is Coverage Map. This is where you can import a floor plan image and scale it to this grid, and then start placing multiple of our MXA 910 ceiling array microphones on top to figure out how many you need for a room, or just to see for larger rooms that have many of them, be able to see in one view how those lobes are overlapping with each other. And I'll show that in a little bit with the virtual devices because I don't have an online MXA 910 on my network right now. Lastly is the Signal Flow tab. So this is going to actually show your Dante audio routes between your microphones and processors or interfaces. So I'm actually going to clear my routes and get into a clean state here. And basically what you can do on this page is you can manually create Dante audio routes one at a time by clicking twice, basically, to create those routes. In Designer 4.1, we actually also have a feature called auto route. So I'm going to delete this manual route I made here. This can make it easier to quickly create audio routes between mics and processors. For example, our IntelliMix DSP software has up to 16 processing channels. So you can see how it could be a little time consuming to manually create those routes. So auto route has you select one microphone and then one processor interface, and they've kind of filled out in this dialog here. And now when I click route, it's going to route the available audio channels in one click. Another handy feature of this page is this optimize audio button. As soon as you have one valid audio route created, you can optimize audio in your system. So what this is going to do is, this is very similar to the P300 Web UI templates feature. One moment, there's an ambulance. Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully that wasn't too loud. Okay, so if you're familiar with the Web UI for the P300, it has this templates feature where you can select which microphone you're routing to that P300, and then we know what best audio optimizations to apply to the P300 at that time, and where to best put gains and EQs and things like that. What this does is, since Designer's looking at the whole system, both the microphone and the processor, it can do it all in one click instead of requiring you to kind of go to both web interfaces to set those per device. You can always view a list of the change settings here. It will open a help topic that has a large table of what's changed with this action. So there are quite a bit of different scenarios, so I won't go through this in detail. But depending if you're using an MXA 910 with IntelliMix on it, with a P300 or an MXA, for example, it shows all those different settings that will be changed as a result of optimized audio. So again, I'm in live mode right now. So I make are going to be made in real time. Dante Controller will reflect these latest routes. If you're familiar, Dante Controller is automated software to create routes between Dante products. So that this will always reflect the latest. And move to routes here, they'll be removed in Dante Controller. Okay, so getting into a few of the other features that are a bit different from the web UI workflows, if you're familiar. So again, we went through how the P300 templates kind of evolved into the optimized audio feature for the entire system. The next one I want to talk about is presets. So in Designer 4.1, presets are at the location level. You can save, load, and clear your device presets only from this location level as a 4.1. So what that means is if I want to save this specific configuration, for example, to preset slot 2 on my devices, and call that preset slot 2 on each of the devices, the 310 and the P300, I would have to save a preset slot in my location. So Designer kind of lines it all up. All of your devices will be on the same slot. We did hear some feedback about this. And, for the P300 in this case, if I wanted to, for example, have the processor have a standard set of settings and not duplicate that to other preset slots, that's not accomplishable in 4.0, but we are improving that soon, so it'll be a little more flexible. But this can be handy when you're setting up room presets, for example, for combinable rooms. It kind of manages and aligns everything to the same slot for all devices in the location. Okay, so I'm going to the Overview tab and go through the last two features that have a bit of a different workflow from the web UIs. These are our security settings for audio encryption and password on the devices. So the first is audio encryption. Again, if you're familiar with the web UIs, the current kind of work was that you had to set up a passphrase for encryption on the phone and the processor in each of the web UIs. What Designer does is it, again, looks at the whole system. It's able to see that I have a 310 and P300 in this location, and you have the option to either auto-generate or type in a manual. So again, if I enable encryption here, it's going to enable it on both the P300 at once. So it makes it a little faster and more streamlined. We do generally encourage to set up passwords on the location or on the devices. And again, this is enabling it at the location level. So when I set up a device password here, this is going to set up that same password on the 310 and the P300 in one fell swoop. Okay, so that was kind of an overview of working with online devices. Again, configuring the single from the online devices list or directly from the location, again, if I double click it, and kind of going through the different workflows from the web UIs. So I'm going to actually switch to another workflow now and get into a clean state and delete these devices from my location and return to working with virtual devices. So the next use case I want to go through is if you're working offline, say you're not connected to the network at all, and just want to get a head start on your design. And we can go through the coverage map a little too, because I think that's important to highlight. So for example, I have my virtual devices here, and again, I can drag and drop them into my location in Designer. And same deal as in live mode, you can double click a device and basically configure all settings when you're off the network so that you can save time on site. There are some settings that aren't configurable off the network, like network settings and obvious things like serial numbers and MAC addresses, but most everything else is settable from the virtual device as well. So let's look at coverage map a little bit. Currently, the coverage map only supports the MXA 910 ceiling array microphone. I will say eventually we're going to get to a spot where the 310 table array will show up in here as well. But for the MXA 310 specifically, you're going to have to double click it as I just did and configure coverage there per mic. So I'll just show an example with an MXA 910 or a couple MXA 910s rather. So you can add an image into Designer and basically scale it with this 2x2 ceiling grid that you see in the background. Let's say that I didn't have measurements on this drawing and I just knew that this doorway was 3 feet wide, for example. You can draw a line and enter a reference size in Designer. Change the opacity and move the image around, and basically have your floor plan here and be able to overlay your MXA 910s over it. There are a few other settings worth noting. You can turn off the grid if you want. You can turn off snap to grid. So that's when the MXA 910 will snap to that 2x2 grid, and a couple other settings. So I'm going to actually drag in a couple MXA 910s and show you what that looks like. It does default with all 8 lobes on in a kind of generic setting that can be used. And this is also the factory default state of the online device. I'm not a professional system designer, but I'll just delete some of these lobes and make a very quick coverage map here just to show what this looks like. So again, I can place these over the image. I can set my device heights up accordingly and add and remove lobes and kind of set up my system with multiple MXA 910s here. So again, this is because Designer is a system software. It can look at multiple devices at once rather than our web interfaces that are kind of one device at a time. Okay, so that's the coverage map. You can do that with online devices as well. Again, I just don't have an MXA 910 on my network. Okay, so I'm going to remove these from my design because I want to show the workflow of getting these settings on the 310 and the P300 to the actual online devices. So let's say that I messed with the settings of the 310 P300, I made my routes and I optimized audio, and now I'm on site and I want to get all these settings to the devices. To do that, you go to the Overview tab and navigate to Live Mode. Again, this is going to show what online devices are available. I should note if they are a part of another Designer location on your Designer app, then they won't show up here. So you kind of have to free them up for you to be able to use them in this design. And what you can do from here is basically drag and drop on top of these little chips to associate your online devices with virtual devices. So this is making that association. At this point, none of my virtual device settings have automatically pushed. So what you do next is, because this says not synced, that means that the virtual and online devices are out of sync. You can synchronize from this button. And you can either push from your virtual devices to your online devices, or vice versa, you can pull from your online devices to a design. If, for example, you get on site and you want to save a backup of what's currently on the network before you make any tweaks in real time. For this example, though, I'm going to show the push. So again, this will be pushing from virtual to online. This is going to overwrite all settings, again, except for a few exception settings like network. And this may take a couple seconds here. And definitely, if you have more devices in your design, could take up to a minute or a couple minutes. But should go fairly fast here. Okay. So now I'm in live mode, and it encourages me to save this design as a preset before making any further changes. I should mention in Designer 4.1, presets are part of those settings that aren't synced between virtual and online devices. So if you set up a preset in design mode, basically working with those virtual devices, you're going to want to load it to your virtual devices, and then after you push it to online devices, save it again to the online devices, if that makes sense. Again, that presets workflow is improving shortly in an upcoming release of Designer, so look out for that. Okay, so a couple other workflows to go through before we get to the questions. I wanted to mention the templates. So let's say that, I'm on site and I've set up this room and I like how it turned out, and I want to create a cookie cutter room type template that I can reuse over and over. So let's say a small room template. What this will do is basically a copy with virtual devices of what I just did. So you'll see the MXA 310 and the P300 in here. And the way to basically create copies of this room is to create a location from a template. So again, your template is your single source of truth, and then you'll basically start creating copies from there, and you can kind of push one room at a time from virtual to online devices. Currently, there's not the capability to use one template and push that to many rooms at once, but we know that's a popular desire. So we're working on figuring that out and how we can best accommodate that kind of use case. But for now, your use case is kind of focused on the one room at a time. It is a little time saving, so you don't have to go one device at a time and import presets per device, and you get to the room level. And of course, then we'll improve this as we go and try to make it even more streamlined. And lastly, I wanted to point out the exporting and importing of projects. So if you want to share your work with other people who have Designer, you can go to this homepage here and go to the three dots on the right. Let me show that again. When you hover over the project, you'll see those three dots, and you can export this project file. This can then be imported. If another user, for example, wants to go to new and import project, they can import your work. This is useful if you're collaborating with multiple people. And I should mention that what the project file contains is just the virtual device information. So one important point is that our devices don't know about their Designer location. So if someone else has a different instance of Designer, if they want to kind of recreate those location names that you've set up, they can either import the project and then basically associate those online devices again with each room. Or in a coming release, we'll be able to basically have an easier way of creating locations faster based on devices routing. So you'll see what's already routed and be able to quickly create locations based on that. Okay, so I think those were the main use cases I wanted to go through, and I think we can move to questions now, Cheryl.
Okay, great. First question, why does auto route not complete the AEC return?
Yes, so we've definitely heard this. Our main goal in 4.1 specifically was to solve the problem for, the larger channel count, for example, the IntelliMix room example that I named. But we definitely know that the recommended setting is to bring the reference back into the microphone, for example. Have an MXA 910 here. Let me actually show that really quick and go back out of live mode. I'm going to show you with virtual devices again because I don't have a 910. Yeah, so we're aware that, ideally auto route would do this as well, and other optimal audio routes that Shure would recommend. And we are actually improving this feature for an upcoming release. I can't say too much about it, but it will be smarter than it is in 4.1. So look out for that.
Great. So once you have a shop configuration with a virtual device, this can be uploaded to actual devices?
Yeah, so basically with that workflow that I showed, if you're working on your virtual device design, you can upload that via that push work. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Next question. As beams track and move around on the MXA microphones, is there any predictive modeling to view where the beams might move to? Also, would this application show the beam tracking in real time?
Yes, so if you're in live mode, unfortunately I can't show it because again, I don't have a real 910 on my network. But when you're in this coverage map, we have that autofocus feature that came out as a part of a recent MXA 910 firmware release. And let's say this was an online device, you would see the lobe basically moving around on this coverage map with that autofocus technology.
Great. Are there any plans to get MXW devices into this software and an ATA for that?
There is, yes. So we're all aware, I think, of flash removal coming very soon, end of 2020. So we are working on getting MXW into Designer as well. So it should be by the end of this year in time for that deadline. And then you'll be able to send it out alongside our processors and everything else.
Fantastic. All right, next question. Is there a way to import older design files, like from version 3.2 to the new 4.1 version?
Yes, if you have project files from an older production version of Designer, you can import those into the newer versions. We'll say we're not backwards compatible, so you can't export out of 4.1 and import it into 3.2, for example, but we are forwards compatible.
Great. Next question. Does Designer work with other non-Shure Dante devices?
It does not. It's all about Shure networked microphones and processors and interfaces.
Okay. My current issue with Designer is that it will not show online devices. Device discovery and update utility both show the device, but not Designer. Any thoughts there?
Okay. Well, we do have a system support team that can definitely help with that, but the basic things I would check, already checked to make sure the correct NIC is selected in Designer. We do have one issue where if you quickly change your enabled NICs on your computer and then you open Designer immediately after that, it can have trouble with discovery and you have to basically close and reopen the app to see them. So that might be worth looking into. Other than that, though, it should automatically discover everything on the same subnet. So if you've already tried those steps, I would reach out to our support team and we can go from there to help troubleshoot it.
Great, thank you. And to open up a ticket with our support team, all you have to do is go to shure.com/contact and fill out the form there, and that will open up a support ticket with them, and they should be able to talk you through anything. All right, next question. How long until we can import and export .json for a single room? Projects are too broad.
Yeah, so we're definitely aware that users have a desire to basically share rooms or locations instead of the entire project. So we are working on some architecture updates right now to make it more usable to get into a room faster, for example, and be able to share smaller sets of files. I can't exactly promise a date right now, but we are aware of that problem and working on a solution.
Great. Next question. How long until we can print a PDF of a lobe layout? This is critical for showing to customers.
Yeah, same answer, unfortunately, but we are aware of that request. I can't provide a time frame right now. And if the customer, I'm guessing, might not have Designer and you don't want to just give them the project file, the best workaround I can say right now is to, go to your virtual devices and basically take a screenshot of this. One small usability improvement that's coming soon that I think I can talk about is that we're going to have layers in this coverage map so that you'll be able to also differentiate which lobes go with which 910. I have seen in the past when people were kind of sharing their project files, they were coloring the lobes so that the end user could see which channels go with which 910. So we are solving that problem. So I think the screenshot will be a little more handy with those usability improvements that are coming soon. But actually exporting to a PDF is still not on the timeline right now.
Okay. Next question is actually for me, believe it or not. Hi, I accidentally joined the webinar at the wrong time and joined late. Would I be able to later download this webinar? As I mentioned at the top, of course you weren't here, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. It usually takes us a couple of days just to edit the audio and make sure everything is nice and pristine for you. But once it's available, it'll be viewable at shure.com/webinars. And we'll also send up a follow-up email when that link is ready for the on-demand version. Okay, next question is back to you, Katie. Is there a way to rotate the MXA 910 in the software and have the lobes stay in the same place?
Not at this time. So when you rotate the 910, the lobes are going to come with it. However, as I mentioned, we're going to have that layers feature very soon where you can turn on and off the audio coverage. And that was kind of building towards that request so that you can lock layers as well. So we don't have the lock yet, but that's our kind of ideal way of solving that problem that you mentioned. And thanks for bringing it up. We'll definitely keep it in mind for another release.
Great. Next question. How can we use Designer to determine how many microphones or MXA 910 are needed for a specific room?
Yeah, so I would say using the coverage map is the do that. You can basically set up your room dimensions here. If you don't have a floor plan image, you don't have to use it. You can use this kind of white space to put your room dimensions in here. And then it's important to make sure that your device height is right. So if you know that your MXA 910s would be installed at a 9-foot height, you want to make sure those are right because that will reflect on the coverage of the lobes. And I think from there, the best way is you can also, validate with your Shure representative to make sure it makes sense, the number that you've designed for, but you can at least get a rough idea using this coverage map here.
Great. Next question. Can designers send email alerts for potential issues?
So no, Designer is a desktop application, so it's not always running and always monitoring, but we do have system on software. So that sits on a server on the client site, and that can send text and email alerts when there are issues like low batteries on wireless mics, or if a device falls off the network, for example. So you would really want to go for a server-based app for those kind of things, unlike Designer, which is a desktop app that is closed when you're not using it.
Great. All right, next question. Is it possible to disable auto steering on individual channels?
It is not. Autofocus is not a setting that is something that you can change on the 910.
Okay. Somebody here commented on the PDF export. Windows snipping tool is your friend for getting graphics out. So there you go. Next question.
Yeah, for now.
Is there any way to lock MXA 910s in place in the coverage map in case they are accidentally moved when a grid is not available?
So no, but I think that along with the lobe, the request to not move the lobes when rotating the MXA 910, we could definitely explore some sort of thing in the same kind of fashion with the layers that I was talking about. Yeah, if you're in the snap to grid mode where it does snap, let me zoom in a little bit, where it snaps to this 2x2 ceiling grid you see, then you're less likely to get in trouble. But yeah, you're right that it is the case if you have the snap off, this can kind of move freely. So we'll definitely look into that, and thanks for bringing it up again.
Awesome. All right. I think that wraps up all the questions. So if you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask or something that pops up in your head later, as I mentioned, you can always reach out to our support team at shure.com/contact, and that's the way to open up a ticket with them. And we have a late breaking question. So should we try to minimize lobe overlap and use less lobes when using two MXA 910?
So what I understand is the best practices are to use overlap and generally less lobes, but wider lobes because you can set the lobe width here. I would recommend going to the MXA 910 training for that type of thing. I don't feel like I'm the exact expert on that, so I would kind of defer to that. But those are the best practices I'm aware of from, all of our people that are in the field doing this every day.
Fantastic. Yeah, we have a lot of great training opportunities for both MXA 910 and all of our other products that you can access on the Shure Audio Institute's Learning Management site, or LMS. And if you go to shure.com/training, you can start to kind of peruse around there and see the different courses and trainings that are available. And then in addition to that, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, just simple questions or even deeper questions, you can always send those to shure.com/contact and open up a ticket with our support team there. Next question, they keep rolling in. Is there any calculator or tool for coverage of the microphone according to the room size?
So not in Designer. We do have a calculator online, I believe, for the PAGNAG calculator for the microphone. But in Designer, you're going to have to place those on the room basically, and then go from there.
Okay. Next question. Can you import two images such as a floor plan and RCP?
So what you can do is you can have one image per preset. So again, those location presets that I was showing in this top right before, if you have a combinable room and have different seating configurations, you can have a different floor plan per preset. However, if you're trying to kind of turn on layers for a reflected ceiling plan and that floor plan at once from one preset, you can't do that at this moment, but we are aware that that's a request and it is in our backlog. So thank you.
Fantastic. All right, now I think we're done with the questions. So if you have anything else that crops up, you can go to shure.com/support to open up a ticket with our support team. And once again, this webinar will be available in a couple of days at shure.com/webinars, and we will send the link out as well. We want to thank you so much for joining us, and I want to thank Katie for all the great information and hands-on guide. And we hope to see you on the next one. So have a great day, everybody. Take care.